What's up, everybody, and welcome to another excellent episode of the Hogmolly Hustle. We got a lot of big games to talk about, and it's going to be another college football themed game. Before we get started, Austin, my buddy, my pal, how you doing?
Doing great, Caleb. It's the holiday season. A little behind on my Christmas shopping. I need to kick it into high gear, but other than that, can't complain.
Do you know what my bougie niece asked me to get her?
A Peloton.
No, I'm glad. Uh, AirPods,
Hmm.
which, pretty big things for an elementary school kid to have. These little tiny things that surely will get lost. But she's bougie. So I asked my sister, I was like, hey, can I get some like off-brand ones and paint the Apple thing on there? Think she'll notice? Like, oh no, she'll definitely notice. It's like, crap. So can't do that. But gotta love the season of giving. Fantastic. But as far as receiving, we're receiving a lot of big bowl games, football games in the NFL, big games in the month of December. So even though I have to drop some money for AirPods, I'm okay because I'm getting the return favor with all these games. Before we get started, if you are watching this, you just tuned in, make sure you like and subscribe, follow, do all those things to keep track of all the things that we talk about. If you like what we say, don't like what we say, leave a comment, be kind, please rewind. All right, so the NFL had some big games. The big Monday night game we'll get to, talk about the impact that had. Before we get to that, I want to start off small here. Small for us, small for the rest of the NFL, but huge for the Detroit Lions. We talked about this earlier in the season. Would the Detroit Lions go defeated? And I said, they're turning around when they got a tie. And against a division opponent in a very close game, they are able to win. With a Golden Tate drop kick to the face, jumping into the end zone, they're able to score the touchdown, win the game, and get their first win. And all respect to Dan Campbell. He, of course, gave the win. He dedicated the win to the victims in the shooting in Michigan, which is a very classy thing to do. Get read off all the names. Very good thing to do. Again, gotta love this Dan Campbell team.
Absolutely. It's one of those games where it wasn't pretty. It wasn't something that the Lions are going to look back on the film and say, wow, we really did our job. But nevertheless, on Sundays, all you have to do is come out with more points than the other team, and that's what they did. Looking at the box score, Vikings had 3 more first downs than Detroit did. Third down efficiency, Vikings were 6 of 13. Detroit was 2 of 11. Total yards, the Vikings had 50 more yards than Detroit did. Detroit threw an interception. The Vikings had 0 interceptions. Looking at fumbles lost, Detroit with 2 and the Vikings with 1. The Vikings even controlled time of possession by 7 minutes. It was not anything to write home about if you are a member of the Lions personnel. But again, super happy for Dan Campbell. Watching that locker room celebration, his guys just supporting him, and it was a special thing to see. And I'm just glad that they finally got over the hump. They finally get that out of the way. Now you can go try to win a couple more games. Even if you rifle out a couple other wins, you're still going to be looking at one of the better picks of the draft. It'll be interesting to see where they go there. There's a lot of ways that they could go. I've heard some rumblings about possibly keeping Aiden Hutchinson, the DN from Michigan, in the state of Michigan with that top pick. So that would be interesting. An interesting landing spot for him. But you've got to be happy for Dan Campbell.
Yeah. So we'll definitely talk more about the draft once we get closer to that. But it's like we talked about earlier, there are some very winnable games for the Lions here towards the end where they can start picking up some steam for next year. So got to look forward to that. So now let's jump it up a little bit. Let's look at the Los Angeles Chargers versus Cincinnati, which started out, I don't know if you watched this game, it started out a blowout. I mean, the Chargers were just dogging the Bengals. And then as the game went on, the Bengals started making some plays and getting back into it. You had to deal with some injuries to their quarterback. Did you see his pinkle? Pinkle. Did you see his pinky through that? Swelled like a grapefruit.
Yeah, injuries like that I try to typically avoid. I don't have a super weak stomach, but ever since the Kevin Ware basketball injury, I think it was 2012 at Louisville. I mean, you just got to be careful watching injury videos and photos on the internet.
Yeah. Well, Burrow definitely felt it, and it was something that impacted him in that game. You could tell it was ginger. Every time he moved, he was trying to shake his finger awake, get it back open and going. He still made some mistakes. Some of it was just not being able to put some touch on the ball. The last interception never really should have been thrown, but that's just the way it is. They almost came back and won the game. Herbert played well. The Chargers played well, and hopefully this gets them back on track. That's what they're hoping for, at least, especially with the playoffs getting as tight as they are, which we'll talk about.
Absolutely. I mean, this was a game that both teams really needed a W. I mean, they both sides could really use a win, and that's what makes these NFL Sundays in early December so good. A lot of desperation, a lot of teams that are kind of hanging on the edge, trying to get right the ship and get back in there. I wasn't able to catch this game, but based on everything that I heard, everything that I saw on Twitter, it looked like it should have been closer than it actually was in the final score. But like you said, some missed balls, and you can only afford to make so many mistakes against a good football team, and that's what happened here.
I will say this. There is a lot of hope to be had with both of these teams. I think that the trend is definitely going upward. Trey Hendrickson playing really well for the Bengals. That is a very good pickup, and people thought that he was not going to be that big of an impact coming from that, saying he might have been a system player, but he's playing really well. And
and Hubbard as well.
Yes,
Hubbard, I think he has 8 or 9 sacks, 7.5 on the season. So, Hubbard has 7.5, and Hendrickson has 11.5. So Hendrickson's actually 5th in the sack leaderboard right now.
Yeah, very effective defense. I mean, that's a big thing that Cincinnati, when they've had their best teams, they've had a really good pass rush. So if they can get that back and they can get a consistent offense, watch out, AFC North. And the trend or the topic of this week is gotta win the games. And there's a lot of these wins. The next few games are going to be about gotta win that. Like you mentioned, gotta win that game. Baltimore, Pittsburgh. Baltimore needed to win this game to put them in a really good position going forward. They weren't able to get that done. 2019, I believe, somewhere around that score towards the end. Very close game. A classic type of AFC North matchup. Grind it out. Weren't able to get away with that win. Huge win for Pittsburgh going forward. Loss for the Bengals also hurt them. The Browns seem to be fading out here. They got a big game that we'll talk about a little bit later. And you can cut me off if they need to talk about this. And another one.
I'll just say for just watching the Steelers game, the one thing that stood out to me was Big Ben's reaction on the sideline. This week we kind of caught wind that this is supposed to be Ben's last year in Pittsburgh. And so we don't know if that means he's retiring or, maybe he might explore other options for different teams. Who knows? My guess is retirement because he's been rumored to be leaning towards retirement since the Harlem Shake was popular, it seems like. So, watching him on the sideline, he kind of savored it a little bit more than he would just an average, win. And so It's kind of the ending of a chapter in NFL football. You got guys like Rodgers getting up there in age, Brady up there in age. Brady will still probably play till he's 60, but we'll see. Phillip Rivers retiring, Eli Manning retiring. Kind of a new chapter to see guys like you said with Burrow and Herbert and some of these young arms kind of be able to take over the league. So a little bit of a changing of the guard.
Yeah. Speaking of Manning, different Manning, but did you hear the back and forth that he and Joe Buck have had over their broadcast over the past little bit?
Yeah. I tuned in the Manning cast long enough to hear that. It was great.
Where you talk about, it's nice to be able to talk about somebody that knows as much about defensive coverages as I do, instead of listening to someone like Joe Buck. And then Joe Buck responds, so do you guys ever have to dig in, like bring in some guests when it's like a big blowout? He's like, yeah, well, last time I thought about doing that was when you guys played the Seahawks in the Super Bowl. It's like, ouch, and that's awesome. I love to see that. Obviously, they're buddies. Obviously, they're buddies, but that's just funny to see. I think that's what I like the most about the Manning cast is it's just like
it's organic.
It's like having a beer with some guys watching football or something like that. I like it. I know there's some people that don't like it. They say it's like distracting. I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. So another big win was Seattle over San Francisco. And when you look at the grand scheme of things as far as what's in store for the Seahawks going forward, they didn't really need that win. Optimally, there's a lot of fans that would say, well, I just want a better draft pick. But you always want to see your team win. And the Niners really needed that win. But anytime you can beat a division opponent, it is a big win, and you got to be somewhat happy about it. Then again, there's some weird fans like we talked about. But man, Russell Wilson still looks awful. He can make some of the passes, but he's super hesitant. I've never seen him like this. He was pump faking on screen passes. They were doing so many screen passes, he was double pumping to throw it. He doesn't trust his arm. He doesn't trust his hand. Reasonably so.
He doesn't trust his offensive line.
Doesn't trust the offensive line. And he just can't get it going. Doesn't trust himself. He's on week 6 of a 10-week injury. So it's.
Yeah, I mean, he was rushed back into the fire way too soon in desperation to try to keep the Seahawks playoff hopes alive. I didn't like that decision then, and I don't like it, now.
Yeah.
But given the situation with Russell in Seattle, how this might be his last year there, I think that they both sides wanted to give it a go, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, I think this had to be a Russell Wilson decision. I think that the Seahawks probably said, look, we need you to come back healthy to have any chance at this or to do whatever comes next. And if Russell Wilson can play, and he's very, very tough, one of the toughest quarterbacks in the league, if he can play, he's going to play. And right now, he's playing when he probably shouldn't be playing. So
yeah, I mean, who would tell him no? I mean, if he goes to Pete Carroll and says, "Listen, I'm good to go," you're going to listen to your guy, right? It was a big win for Seattle, but they did have a big loss as well. Jamal Adams torn labrum and some other shoulder damage. He's out for the season. They're expecting that he should be back sometime early 2022. So big blow to a defense that already has a lot of holes in it. Also, another note from that game, Adrian Peterson, a guy who has had a tremendous NFL career, just seems to keep bouncing around, finding playing time, trying to get his career stats as best cranked out as he can. He scored his 126th career touchdown, and he's now tied for 10th all time with Jim Brown. So that's a remarkable milestone. AP has been very fun to watch, specifically in his Vikings days. And so happy for him to get that milestone.
Is it not ironic, though, that one of his first carries was a fumble?
He did have a big fumbling issue.
But To show you how bad the Seahawks running back situation is right now, he was brought into the practice squad not too long ago, and then shortly after brought to the starting roster, and now and starting because of their situation with all their running backs. Just a bad situation there for the Seahawks. But it is good to see Adrian Peterson still being able to bounce around, and he's going to have to hang it up here soon, unfortunately. But a lot of good memories, a lot of bad memories, him being a Viking for all that time.
I'm sure.
But
I'm sure.
Very impressive. One of the most impressive physical specimens. So now let's get to the game that we talked about last week as being the game. And it didn't go the way people thought it would because of the weather. But was this not just an AFC East game? I mean, you talk about some of these northern teams and some of their bad weather, this gale force wind blowing left and right. The kickoff goes way into the stands early on at the very first kick of the game. Missing field goals, not trusting the kickers. Can't really throw the ball because the ball is being carried. Really went against the Buffalo Bills. And this is something that as soon as I heard about the weather, I said, that's not good for Buffalo. And for New England, that benefited them greatly.
Yeah, absolutely. New England's one of the best teams in the NFL at just playing hard-nosed football, running the ball. They have a back system to where they have kind of the power guy in Ramondre Stevenson, someone who I'm very high on. He can catch it out of the backfield, do some different things in that offense. You got Damian who can, run outside of the tackles, pretty quick guy, quick on his feet. And then Bolden who can kind of do some of both. And it was hard-nosed football. It was windy. I think New England only attempted like less than 5 passes the entire game. And so at times, if you squinted your eyes, you might think that it was the Lombardi Packers versus the Bears out there. Old-fashioned hard-nosed football, walking up to the line, pointing at your man and say, I'm going to beat you today. And, if you're a football purist, I'm sure that was fun. As much as I love the high-scoring, high-octane offenses in the NFL today, lots of touchdowns, lots of big plays, it is refreshing every once in a while to just watch that grindstone power football game. And so it wasn't the game that I anticipated due to the conditions, but I think that, two great teams going head-to-head, and when I saw the forecast, I had a feeling that the Patriots would be able to come out victorious. And it is of note that, talking about that playoff picture, we'll look a little bit later more in depth, but Patriots are looking at a 1 seed right now if they can continue to take care of business. And if that happens, Caleb, they're going to have to play a lot of games in Foxborough, assuming they advance. And so we could see this, bad weather, running team. We could see this trend come back up in the playoffs, and that could mean big things in the AFC playoff picture.
Yeah, it's definitely something to watch, and like you said, we'll talk about that when we talk about the playoffs a little bit later. But it definitely seemed like in that game, you saw what felt like 10 guys on the field, plus your quarterback and running back out there, just blocking, mauling through guys, and it was some pretty fun stuff to watch. Not the most exciting for average fans, but when you like the trenches and like to see that kind of warfare going on out there, really fun to watch.
Final tally on the Patriots on the split of their yardage. Rushing yards, 222. Passing yards, 19. So
That's like it's like a Madden stat. You just say, "Oh, I'm just gonna keep running on you. What are you gonna do? Stop me?" It's crazy. That's crazy. Okay, so now we got some college football stuff. Some big games changed around the Final Four here. And I got to say, we got the outcome we wanted. We looked at some of the big games here. We said, what's the odds? Can Oklahoma State get in? How can we avoid an Alabama-Georgia first-round matchup? We talked about all the scenarios. We talked about, is Oklahoma going to be able to make it in if Alabama loses? What's going to happen to Georgia? some discussions to be had there. I saw a lot of people on Twitter saying that Georgia shouldn't be in the Final Four after that loss, and I thought.
So let me debunk that rumor right now, or that belief system. Heading into that game, Georgia's defense allowed 7 points per game this year. I don't care if you're playing in the Sun Belt. That is huge. I mean, that is very difficult to do. And so, did they perform poorly against Alabama? Absolutely. They did not perform up to the level that you would expect them to. But that is the lone blemish on their resume. And it's against Alabama. So, Georgia absolutely, if you want to argue the seeding, then sure, argue the seeding. But they absolutely are one of the 4 best teams in college football.
Yeah. Well, I remember one specific, I remember seeing some schmuck on Twitter talking about, this is my schmuck voice. Well, Baylor's win over Oklahoma State's better than any of Georgia's wins. It's like, that's a very big win, yeah. But we're going to talk about Clemson they beat early on in the season when Clemson was supposed to be a juggernaut. They didn't turn out to be. Did Georgia beating them early on have an impact on that? I don't know. But some of the other games they had, I mean, look at some of the teams they beat. Arkansas, that was hot, shut them down.
Arkansas, who was a top 25 team and was playing very well at the time, went to Athens and looked like a peewee football team. Had no clue how to do anything. It's like the Monstars came and sucked all their powers out of them. And watching Oklahoma State on Saturday, it was the most frustrating game I have seen in a long time. I was wanting the Cowboys to pull it out against Baylor, not because I wanted Oklahoma State in the Final Four. I don't think that they're that great. But I'm a bit of a hater. I get sick and tired of seeing Bama in the playoff every year. I like to have the wealth spread around and get new teams in, get new matchups and that sort of thing. And I thought that if Oklahoma State beat Baylor, they had to have a spot, right? So if Cincinnati wins, then they have to have a spot. Michigan wins, they have to have a spot. And then, regardless of the Georgia-Bama game, if those 3 outcomes happened, would you not let Georgia in? I can't see that happening. So, Oklahoma State had 2 opportunities in that second half where they had the ball on either the 1 or 2 yard line, first and goal, and they didn't punch it in. And so the first possession, 3 measly plays and a field goal. Okay, the second possession I'm talking about to end the game, you get first and goal. I think it was around 50 seconds left from like the 2 yard line, and can't punch it in. The fourth and goal play, the final play of the game, running back takes it on the outside, has a seam and a possibility to cut back and just truck the guy. I mean, you need 1 yard. So you have momentum. It's much harder as a defender to stop that momentum than it is as an offensive player to just truck him and get that 1 yard, especially when you can just reach the ball across the plane. But wanted to bounce it outside and beat him around the edge, and it didn't happen. And so Oklahoma State, it stinks if you're a Cowboys fan to know that you were 1 yard short of the playoff. But you've got to execute in those moments.
And it's kind of shows you the skill of that defense or the blunders on the other team, on Baylor's offense, to see that Oklahoma State's quarterback threw about 4 interceptions at one point.
It was a brutal game.
And they still almost won. So now it was an exciting game. It was a messy game. A lot of turnovers, just back and forth. I was like, oh my gosh, this is just miserable, going back and forth and just not a lot happening. Then it kind of tightened up there towards the end. And that goal line stand was pretty exciting. Anytime you get multiple plays there, pretty exciting. Like you say, probably could have went a little bit differently. We could talk about Michigan. We talk about Cincinnati here in a second. But before we move on, I want to talk about Bryce Young and just how ridiculous he is. I mean, he is absurd. I mean, you talk about guys that have the pro caliber arm, the mobility, the size, He's got all that. He's young, but he has this vision. And I know that all the announcers were fawning over it, but being able to run and just have like a no-look pass, look over and see a guy and just flick it over to him for a big play, a big first down. And he just has this feel. He played a really, really good game. Just very impressive. There was a fumble at one point that somehow he was able to get his hand on that. The defender kind of let up, could have dove on it, instead wanted to pick it up and run it for the touchdown, and because of that, quarterback was able to get it. But even still, quarterback on the bottom of a pile comes out with the ball. You got to respect that. I mean, that's just very impressive.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too ahead of myself here, but just watching him play, kind of the way that he's able to operate, especially in tight situations, it's like his heartbeat is the same whether Bama's up 20 or down 20. And so in that regard, and I don't want to use this as a comp necessarily, but he does remind me of a young Russell Wilson. Being able to remain calm under pressure, always extend the play, do what he has to do to put his team in a good position. And like you said, I don't think that he has realized his ability as a runner. I think that the vision, like you said, and ability to kind of read the play development and go through his progressions, I think that he has some improvement to make in that regard. And if he makes that improvement, he's going to be special.
I've said this before. Ever since he's got there, I started to watch him once he got to play. He's the best quarterback that Alabama's ever had. You just talk about all the talent he's got. I mean, of course, he has to go a little bit further to get the stats to back that up. But as far as talent goes, to me, it's not close. You look at Tua, you look at Jalen, you look at Mac Jones, all solid college quarterbacks. Who's going to be the best? I mean, it might be Mac Jones. We'll see what happens. But as far as a prospect goes and having everything, he's just got everything. And it's just very impressive. We talked about this, just how rare quarterbacks are, quarterbacks like that. You mentioned Russell Wilson, but Aaron Rodgers also has that ability. The face of the franchise quarterbacks all have that. And I hope he can stay healthy because I really want to see him on Sunday. And he will get there so long as he can stay healthy and nothing bad happens. But I just love his skill set and what he's able to do. And, well, if it ends up being a rematch with Georgia, it could be a really big rematch. We'll talk about that. But let's talk about Michigan. We love our Michigan. We love Aiden Hutchinson. We love Ajabo. We love that team. I have turned into a Harbaugh fan after hearing about some of his selfless acts, giving the bonuses that he earned to the rest of the Michigan State coaches, or Michigan coaches, not Michigan State, that'd be weird. The Michigan coaches that had their salaries cut through COVID, really making me turn over a new leaf for Harbaugh. And I'm kind of cheering for this team. And that Georgia Michigan team, that Georgia-Michigan game, rather, should be pretty good. I think if Aiden Hutchinson can get going, that game is going to be pretty darn good.
Yeah, I think that, talking about the quarterback position, I don't think that Georgia has a guy that they have the utmost confidence in Stetson. And, when you have two edge rushers like Ajabo and Hutchinson, it's, you can see a scenario where they feast on that offensive line, even as good as it is, and just disrupt that Georgia offense enough so that Michigan can stick around and then in the second half maybe make some plays and win a close one. I think that that's definitely in the cards. I do know that if Michigan's going to win that game, Hutchinson and Ajabo and the rest of that D-line has to show up. They have to come and be a wrecking ball, a big force on New Year's Eve and disrupt that Georgia offense, specifically that run game. You don't want to let Zamir White get going. You don't want to let those running backs, start opening up in space and getting, you know, space in open field and be able to run downhill. So it starts with containing those guys. And, you know, I was super impressed with Hutchinson against Iowa. You know, an Iowa offensive line with a leader like Linderbaum, the center that's supposed to be going, you know, top 15 in this year's draft potentially. But no, I definitely think that Georgia-Michigan has the potential to be a very close, very solid playoff game. Now, the other game, we'll see. But I anticipate Georgia-Michigan being a pretty tight game, at least until the fourth quarter.
I think the key for Michigan, and Alabama showed this, no other team has really been able to do this, you got to get at the secondary of Georgia. And the front seven hasn't allowed that all season. And to be fair, Georgia's got some talent back there, but they lost two guys in the NFL draft, two really talented players in the NFL draft. That's tough, Stokes and Campbell. You can't just replace those guys immediately. That's tough for any team. And they got at them with some really talented pro-caliber receivers. Now, Michigan's got to do that. They got a strong offensive line, a big, ugly, Hogmolly offensive line. They have to be able to, if nothing else, on play action, get that passing game going and get at their defensive backs. You got to open that up. Now, question somebody asked me. It's actually a Georgia fan, and he just asked me a rhetorical question. Well, not really rhetorical. He was expecting an answer. He said, if you're Georgia, is there any chance that you go away from Stetson Bennett?
I would say no, and I don't know if it's a decision based on ability as much as it is a decision based on morale. I think that benching your starting quarterback who's been the starter every game this season except for when he was injured, 2 games or something like that. I don't think that going away from him and folding and turning to your number 2 sets the right tone in that locker room, especially we haven't seen Georgia have to be resilient this season. They haven't had a game following a loss the entire year. And so if I'm on that offensive line or if I'm just on the defense, I don't necessarily feel as confident in our group if we bench our starting guy, somebody who's led us the entire season pretty much. And so I don't think that that's a move that I would make. Maybe Kirby thinks different. We'll have to see, but I would definitely keep him in there. I would just try to, dissect the film and see what went wrong. I know there was a couple of throws he made that were in tight windows that didn't work out, resulted in an interception. But I think you got to stick with your guy.
Yep, I would agree. I think that you got to look at, him taking over Daniels early on, and you could argue Daniels is a better passer. But when you take away that mobility that Stetson has, that's been a huge part of their offense this year. You run off, extend the play, and hit their great receivers, or hand off to their halfbacks. It's been a big part. That's what really changed this team from that team that played Clemson early on in the season. Got pretty stagnant at different times. Of course, their defense was as good as they have been all season long. But on offense, if the receivers weren't getting open, Daniels couldn't extend the play, and they fizzled out. So I don't think that's the answer to go back. Also, like you say, morale. If you're the rest of that team and your quarterback gets benched after your first loss like that, that makes you feel like that's your fault. You say, hey, he lost his job because of us. That's not good to put on your guys. And, of course, they wouldn't sabotage the other guy coming in after this season, but it would just hurt things because you think you get attached to your guys. You can't just take that away. So, not really a real question to ask and to have a real answer for because I don't think there's any chance. that they replaced Stetson Bennett. Okay, now let's move up. Also, Alabama, Cincinnati. Do you believe in magic? You better. Okay, moving on to some of these bowl games. And who knows? That game could end up being a pretty good game. Who knows? Cincinnati's.
I would love for Cincinnati to pull it out. It's just, I mean, show me one person in America that would bet on Cincinnati in that game.
Oh, there will be. There will be. Somebody's going to put some money and hope for some big payoffs, but people will definitely put a bet on them. But man, I just don't see it happening.
It's hard to see an avenue in which Cincinnati can beat Alabama for 4 quarters.
That's a big stage for Desmond Ridder, though. That's a big stage.
Absolutely, and I hope that if nothing else, Cincinnati can hang with them instead of just being a massive blowout, because they've had such a great season. Fickle's done a tremendous job at that program, and it would be great to see them stick with them and make a game of it. But it's hard to see that happening. So I guess we'll see.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll see what happens, and then, of course, after all this starts kicking off, we'll definitely talk about it. But before the playoffs, championship, we got to look at some of these bowls. These are the things that are really going to make this holiday season great. First game I want to talk about, Michigan State and Kenneth Walker, their stellar running back. Heisman snub, not really being talked about for his performance this year, but has had a really productive season so far. And Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett happened to have a very controversial play against Wake Forest, and a big win over Wake Forest. Unfortunate loss for Wake Forest. Before we talk about the bowl game between Michigan State and Pitt, let's talk about that play and what your thoughts are. And anyone that's that hasn't seen that play, you're living under a rock because it's been all over Twitter. But if you haven't seen it, he took off running, pretty athletic run, goes to fake a slide. The defenders all let up because, as you know, if they slide down, you can't make contact. That's a penalty. He goes to fake a slide. All the defenders slow down. Then he goes, breaks off, runs for the big gain and touchdown. Big play. Really turned that game around. And before I tell you what I think about it, I want to hear what you think about it.
I got a couple of different angles here. One, I give mad props to Kenny Pickett because I think that's one of the most clever football plays that I've seen in a long time.
And athletic.
Yeah. Glad his legs could hold up in that situation. But, yeah, I mean, he was at like the 35 or the 40-yard line when he did that. Faked the slide, defenders bite, and he just runs it around the outside. By that time, he has a step on him because they had
around the what?
The brakes around the sideline.
What I said? Around the outside.
Around the outside.
Around the outside. Yeah.
And so, it was exciting to see. It was hilarious, but at the same time, being someone that has spent time on the defensive side of the ball, and knowing that there are certain times where you absolutely, something goes off in your brain where you're like, all right, I need to hit the brakes. If I hit this guy, I'm going to get a penalty and it's going to impact my team. My coach is going to yell at me. And so I've been on the other side of that as well. And I know that safety or linebacker, whatever position he played, the guy that was right in front of him and let up but could have made the tackle and he could have jarred the ball loose. He was in position to rock Pickett. He has to hate it. That I've seen several people in college football say that they might be looking into that as a potential rule change to where a quarterback can't fake a slide, intentionally the way that he did, because it does create a situation where it would be easier for a defender to, make a vicious hit, try to hit a quarterback who, at that point, becomes a runner. So, again, I don't see a problem in hitting the quarterback if he's 30 yards downfield and is still gaining ground. At that point, he's a runner. He chose to do so. He could have went down before that. But the way in which you do it can get you ejected, and you don't want to get ejected, playing at Bank of America Stadium in the ACC championship game. You don't want to let your team down, your fans down. You don't want to let yourself down. So it's a really unfortunate situation, but it is kind of, you got to give props to Pickett because it was a clever play.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's played pickup, basketball, football, but just thinking on your feet like that and making that play and seeing them slow down and then saying, oh, I'm breaking off. Very, very heads-up play. I don't like it, though.
Somebody said that it was kind of like, how there's not a rule in basketball that you can't pull the person's shorts down in front of you to get the rebound. So you could technically do it, but no one does it because no one wants that to happen to them. Like, no one wants to be boxing out for a rebound and then someone pulls your shorts down and you have to pick them up instead of picking up the ball. So, I mean, that's kind of the way that I view it.
Well, I've heard a lot of views on this saying that, the ramifications for this, if they don't do something about the rules to change it to where possibly if they start the motion to slide, that's it, they're down. Just call the play dead there. Then someone said, well, what if they're just juking? Well, what if they're, it's like, well, he wasn't going down for a slide. He was never going down for a slide. He was just juking. It was just a leg juke. And it's like, well, I think there's a clear difference there, but
I don't think this is the last we've seen of this. I think this is some other guys are going to see this and say, oh, he got away with it. I'm going to do it too. It's going to create a list of, even if they change the rule, like you said, you'll be able to look at the tape and say, well, no, he wasn't intentionally sliding. He maybe got tripped up, or maybe he was trying to juke and he just got a low base and it looked like he was going to slide.
Dude, somebody's going to get destroyed. Somebody's going to get obliterated.
That's what I'm worried about. Someone thinks they're faking the slide and they go headhunting, and then all of a sudden the quarterback gets taken out on a stretcher.
Yeah, I think
that's not safe for the game. That's not what you want to see.
And I think when people talk about that and they say they want to do something about this because the retaliation saying, hey, if I don't know if you're going down for a slide, I'm just going to go. And then if you go down, then I'll jump over you. But if you don't go down, I'm going to destroy you. And I think that is what they should be worried about. It's just like with the taunting situation in the NFL. The reason for it is not because of the, telling adult men what to do. It's to protect, say, hey, we're trying to avoid the confrontation, the retaliation, the big hit that wasn't necessary because somebody taunted. That's the goal for that. It's not fun to watch, and something should be done to adjust that. But I think that's why something will happen about this quarterback sliding situation. I also think that the same thing should apply for quarterbacks going to the sideline. Because we've seen that. I've seen Aaron Rodgers do it, Lamar Jackson do it, Cam Newton do it. All sorts of mobile quarterbacks do this, where they go to the sideline, act like they're going to go out of bounds, then as everybody slows down, kick back in, go for about 8 more yards. Like that. I don't like that either. I think that it is taking advantage of the status of the defense already in an offensive-heavy game. The defense has so many things going against them, and if you keep allowing these things, it's just one more thing that defense has to deal with, and I think it's just not – I don't want to say not fair because that sounds like a weenie way of talking about it, but it's just – it's not cool to see.
If it happens to your team, like if your team's the one that does it and no one gets hurt, but if you're the team that's on defense or if you see somebody get hurt because of it, then it's just not fun.
Yeah. So we've talked enough about that. Let's go ahead and move on. We got some other games to talk about. There's a lot of bowl games that are really, really good. And not necessarily just the name brand teams that are playing. There are a lot of good games all throughout this bowl season. First one to talk about Notre Dame and Oklahoma State. That could be a really big game. Hamilton's a safety for Notre Dame, their star player. They had a pretty good season. Things got a little bit strange after the whole coaching change. And I don't know if you saw that clip. Did we talk about this last week where he got to Louisiana and he already had a Southern accent? I don't know if we talked about that.
I think we did, yeah.
Which is whatever. But Ohio's...
Or at least he didn't say that his players needed to be executed like he did earlier in the season.
Yeah. Well, quick little thing here. Did you hear about all the stuff that Orgeron is apparently involved in sexually?
Yes. Yeah, I think that was more so the reason for them firing him so soon instead of just lack of production.
Yeah. Apparently even brought his honeys to practice to...
Well, the quote that I read was that Orgeron went to the gas station and it's bad, but I read it in his voice. Basically, he showed up to the gas station and I guess he knew this girl or had seen her before.
What's he sound like?
He said,
"Oh, you look like you work out. Well, maybe we can work out together."
And
I'm married.
Yeah, I mean, reading that in his voice, I couldn't help but crack up. But hopefully Coach O gets himself put back on the right track, because some of the stuff that did come out, it didn't sound like a culture that you would want at a program. So, if he's wanting to coach again, then he needs to clean that up.
Newly divorced, too. I think that plays a big role in the whole bounce back thing. And you hope that everything that was done was a consensual thing. You hope that none of that was anyone being taken advantage of. And you can
Go ahead.
And you can argue that in every instance that this is people taken advantage of, so it's not really something to laugh at. But
well, I heard there were reports of a girlfriend of his who was much younger than him. Evidently, her child, her son, who was, not even in high school yet, a younger son, would come to practice and do drills with them and be involved in their practice, and how a lot of people thought that drug the team down and didn't let them accomplish the things they needed to do, take advantage of their time and be, on task. And so I heard that was part of the reason why he was fired as well.
Yeah, definitely a big distraction. But we're not going to talk about them and their bowl game, so we're going to go ahead and move on. Let's see. Ohio State versus Utah. Could be a pretty big one there. See what Ohio State does. That's a pretty big game, a pretty exciting game. Should be pretty close. That's the trend.
An impressive showing by Utah on Friday against Oregon. Oregon, a team that beat Ohio State at the Horseshoe earlier this year. Of course, they had Verdell then, but still, I think that's going to be a lot closer than people think it will be.
Yeah, and that's something to look at, something that should be a pretty solid game. And that's kind of the trend for a lot of these games. All these are pretty good matchups. Ole Miss versus Baylor. Should be an interesting one to watch. In the Sugar Bowl. So that is the last of the big bowls. Now we're moving on to some of the smaller bowls here. And this is where I was really surprised to see some pretty good matchups. Penn State versus Arkansas. What a treat. That should be a good one. This is one that I know you like. South Carolina versus North Carolina in Charlotte for the Battle of Carowinds.
Mayo Bowl. The Battle for Carowinds.
The Duke's Mayo Bowl. Is that?
I just hope.
Is that not just a North Carolina? Is a Carolina title for a bowl game?
Yeah, I mean, as a broke 23-year-old, I had the Walmart brand mayonnaise in the kitchen at Thanksgiving, and my stepdad came in here and he said, "I got you some Duke's Mayo because I couldn't stand having whatever that is in the fridge." So any of our listeners that aren't from North Carolina, Duke's Mayo is it's a staple, evidently. So I can't taste much of a difference, but the South swears by it. So looking forward to that matchup. Sam Howell did say he's going to be playing in that game. It comes full circle because that was the first game in the Mac Brown, Sam Howell era. or Mac Brown Chapter 2, I guess I should say, was against South Carolina at Bank of America Stadium. So, exciting matchup. The battle for Carowinds. And I just pray that this year they do not have the mayo eating competition because my stomach can only watch that for so long without churning inside of itself.
I think they should actually combine a couple of competitions they do there. I think they should make you eat a bunch of mayo and then go do the football toss.
No.
But instead of the football toss, do like a skills competition in the NBA where you got to run around and make that work. But no,
Randy Jackson, it's a no for me, dog.
Yeah. I love Duke's mayonnaise, but I could not chug it. Couldn't do that. I respect myself too much for that. I probably couldn't survive it either, to be honest. Also, I like to see any time now North Carolina and South Carolina can play. I always like that. It's just something, there's a novelty to it.
Well, and Beamer had a pretty good year at South Carolina that no one really talks about. So, the Gamecocks, there'll be some friendly banter at the workplace with that one. I can already predict.
Yeah. Now, here's one. If you love offensive linemen and defensive linemen like we do, and if you've stumbled across this and you're still listening to it, one, thanks for watching. And like and subscribe and do all that fun stuff. But do we have a game for you? If you like offensive and defensive line, Iowa, Kentucky. You get to see some of the top prospects face off against each other, against stiff competition. Darian Grenard, Linderbaum, your boy, the guy you keep toting the whole time throughout all this, as well as the other parts of that offensive line with him. The rest of that Kentucky offensive line should be a lot of running in this game. We've got a big athletic quarterback for Kentucky. This should just be a drag-out game. Kentucky had a pretty good season until they ran into Georgia throughout the season, and they got pulled apart as well. That should be a very fun game to watch in the trenches.
New Year's Day, 1 o'clock, Citrus Bowl. Gotta love it. That's a big slate that day. 12 o'clock, Arkansas, Penn State. 1 o'clock, Oklahoma State, Notre Dame. 1 o'clock, Kentucky, Iowa. 5, Utah, Ohio State. And 8:45, the nightcap, Baylor, Ole Miss. Two of the most high-powered offense in the country. It's going to be a great New Year's Eve, and then followed by a great New Year's Day. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, that's going to be a big one. Wisconsin is a team. I'm not really a fan of Wisconsin per se, but I definitely love a lot of what comes out of Wisconsin. Big, strong, talented offensive linemen. Big, strong defensive linemen. Great defensive players overall. Because of that defense was stellar this year. If there's a defense that was comparable to Georgia, it was Wisconsin. And they always have a good run game. I like to watch what Wisconsin does. And they're going to be playing Arizona State. Another team that they're both about 8-4, I think, last time I checked. Should be a pretty good matchup.
I want to say this right quick about Wisconsin's defense. 4th in total yards allowed. 1st in rushing yards allowed at 65. That's very hard to do, especially in the Big Ten. Till you said that, I didn't realize just how good their defense was this year, but absolutely.
Well, they're one of the most consistent teams as far as and forgive me if I'm wrong, but it should still be Jim Leonhard who's still there doing all that, and he's done a fantastic job. People talk about him going for any head coaching jobs or NFL jobs, and he stayed there, and that team is consistently a top defense. Oklahoma, Oregon. You mentioned that earlier. Talk about that, how that should be a good game. What's going to happen with Oregon now? Oregon had some big changes. Cristobal going to Miami recently.
Oklahoma with some big changes.
Big changes. They got a new head coach, which I somehow missed that along the way. I missed that Venable went back to Oklahoma, where he was fired as a defensive coordinator back in the day, goes to Clemson, goes does really well there, then comes back as the head coach. It's just funny how that works
One of
out.
those ex-girlfriend situations.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, you missed me, didn't you? But it's always nice to see them come back to their alma mater. So we'll see what happens there with Oklahoma. Should definitely see them have a pretty talented defense going forward. See what kind of impact that has and what that's going to do to Clemson. UCLA, NC State. Another one to watch there. This next one is a big one for us. For some people in the nation, probably not that big of a deal. But Appalachian State is going to play Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky, the Hilltoppers have a great quarterback wide receiver duo, which we mentioned a little bit last week. Appalachian State has a really good defense. Now, I'm interested to see what they end up doing to cover Western Kentucky's top receiver, who has something like crazy, like 1,700 total purpose yards.
Let me read off these stats right quick, just to let the viewers kind of understand what we're talking about here. So, the receiver in which you're talking about, Stearns, Stearns is his name, Jareth Stearns. So, 137 receptions for 1,700 yards, averaging 12.5 yards per catch and 14 touchdowns. So he's averaging about 132 yards per game. The quarterback that's throwing him the ball, Zapp, 69% completion percentage, a QB rating of 167.5. That's pretty good.
That's all right.
Thrown for over 5,500 yards, averaging 426 passing yards per game, 56 passing touchdowns, 11 interceptions. He's pretty good.
Yeah,
he's pretty good.
He's all right. But it should be a pretty good matchup because Appalachian State has a pretty good defense. They always have a pretty good defense. That's one of the things that keeps them around even when some of the other things aren't working. They have a good run game and a good defense. And Sean Jolly should be Sean Jolly. I don't know what's a John. John Jolly was a defensive tackle, wasn't he?
Sounds right.
But Sean Jolly is their top corner. Not the guy that led their team in interceptions, as it turns out, but he is their top pro prospect corner this year. And I would be interested to see if he ends up following or covering Stearns through most of this. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. That should be a really good game. If you don't know much about Appalachian State or Western Kentucky, you should definitely try to tune into that one. That one's around 11 o'clock, I think, that day.
11 a.m., Saturday, December 18th.
Yeah, should be a good one to watch. Definitely going to pay attention to that one. Another one here, we got a little bit of time left here. Eastern Michigan versus Liberty. Not really sure how the game's going to go. It should be a decent game. Don't know what much to expect about that. I admittedly didn't really watch too much of Eastern Michigan this year, but I did watch a lot of Liberty. And Malik Willis will bring some attention to that game. And no matter what, you'll get to see him perform. And in a draft class where we still don't have a guy that looks like the guy. We have Corral, Malik Willis, Howell, Ritter. Who are you going to talk about to take that top quarterback spot? Well, we don't know yet. So anytime you can watch any of these quarterbacks in action, and fortunately you get to see a lot of these quarterbacks in action during the bowl season. Definitely going to be something to watch there.
I'm sure there will be tons of NFL scouts at that game.
Maybe a few. Okay. If I miss any games, you can throw them in there.
I will say, I think that an underrated matchup, December 18th, 9:15 p.m., we got Marshall versus Ul Lafayette. This is a 12-1 Ul Lafayette team, a team that beat App State twice, if I'm not mistaken. So, very talented team. They're ranked in the top 25. Marshall, on the other hand, one of the best offenses in the country. It should be one of the better bowl games that first week, that first slate. And it's interesting because Marshall is actually coming to the Sun Belt, so it's a little sneak peek preview of what we could see in the years moving forward.
Yeah, and one more thing about Appalachian State, got to throw this in there, that if they win their bowl game, it will be 7 years in a row winning a bowl game, which is pretty good. I don't know if you knew that.
I'll say also, well, I knew they were undefeated, but I lost count of how many.
Isn't that a good thing?
I mean, you'd like to see them get, a 10-win season and get the big stage. But the fact, anytime you can win a bowl game, it's nice. They've continually proved themselves from the Raycom Camellia Bowl to the Dollar General Bowl. And, they've had some years where they got a little bit more respect, last year specifically. But we're also leaving out Houston versus Auburn. That'll be December 28th at noon. Houston, pretty solid team this year. So that's another one to keep your eye on. The Cheez-It Bowl, Iowa State versus Clemson, Wednesday, December 29th. And Purdue, Tennessee, Thursday, December 30th, in the Music City Bowl. I think that pretty well wraps it up.
Yeah. And people are bashing Clemson because they're not what they have been, but Clemson is still a really good team. People want to say
still super stacked.
People want to say, "Oh, well, they're not that good," and they want to discount. Like we talk about Georgia, like, "Oh, well, they lost to Clemson. Clemson's not that good this year." They're still really good. If you put Clemson against some of those teams in the top 10, a lot of those teams in the top 10, they're probably going to win that one pretty handily. Now, they got to finish their quarterback situation, get that figured out going forward. So that's something to look at. But
Ukulele needs a little more time.
Or maybe they need someone else. Don't know. That's a discussion to be had later. And if you thought I don't know.
Spencer Rattler.
I don't know about that one.
Quinn Ewers.
That'd be pretty good. I don't know. We'll see. I think he still ends up in Texas, like we talked about off the air. That's a discussion for a different day if he decides where he's going by then. Okay. Let's wrap this up with our big boys and looking at some of the games coming up in the upcoming week. My guys, pretty simple here. We've talked about one of them I know for sure. Don't know about the other one. We got to mention it. He's not going to win the Offensive Rookie of the Year. It's just not going to happen. But he deserves respect. Rashaan Slater is playing out of his mind. I think he's ranked second as a pass protector this year. He's just not allowing pressures, not allowing sacks. Super impressive, especially in that division. He has some pretty good edge rushers in that division.
Absolutely.
And he is just playing really, really well. And that's a big reason for this success because that offensive line has been something that has not been all that good for Los Angeles in these past recent years.
It's huge for the progression of Herbert, too, to be able to have that time to make the reads that he needs to.
Yeah, and that is huge for his development as well. You got to get them time. We've looked at what it looks like when quarterbacks don't get time, and that hurts their development. But definitely, big play from Slater. And then one guy that I liked coming out of the draft, he fell for, I believe it was off the field reasons that weren't really actual reasons, and he just kind of ended up falling out of the first round. That was Christian Barmore, best tackle in the most recent class. He's playing really well for New England. Surprise, surprise! All this news comes out about a prospect that New England ends up picking up, and it turns out well for New England. Really athletic. And this is not really this is kind of a lazy, easy comp here. He has a lot of Quinnen Williams to him in that he can move. He's not quite the pass rusher that Quinnen Williams is, but he's got that slender big body, if that makes any sense. A good old solid 300 pounds, can move around, can get after the quarterback if he needs to, but he's really good at occupying blocks. I hate to see people talk about rookie defensive linemen or young defensive linemen and say, well, they're just not that good. That was a wasted pick. They're not getting sacks. They're not getting tackles for loss. That's not necessarily the job of defensive linemen. For example, I heard a lot of people talk bad about Carolina Panthers and their young defensive tackle saying, well, he's just not getting the pressure that he needs to be getting. That's not his job.
That's because he's getting double teamed.
Exactly. That's what you want. You want him to not be making the play so somebody else can. Anyway, schmucks. Schmucks all over Twitter. I hate him. Twitter sucks. But Christian Barmore's playing really well. And we'll have a discussion about who we think is going to win the awards a little bit later. I don't think he'll win Defensive Rookie of the Year because there's some other candidates that are playing really, really well. But by golly,
that's going to go to Micah Parsons.
Oh yeah, I think that's pretty clear. But let's not ruin our episode before we get to it, as if anybody didn't know. But Christian Barmore playing really well, and I think he's going to be a key piece for whatever happens for New England for the future because that team could end up being really, really loaded with the money they have on a rookie quarterback contract. But that's for another day. There's mine.
Well,
where's yours?
We have about $80 million locked up in tight end contracts, so we'll see. But definitely a lot of young talent in New England. So got into my hotel Sunday night and was watching the Broncos and Chiefs game. And I was super excited about Shavontae Williams getting big minutes, former running back at Carolina. Had a huge game, but the reason why he had a huge game is because excuse me, my tongue is getting in the way, because of Dalton Risner, guard for the Broncos, a big 6'5", 312 Hogmolly, guy out of Kansas State, still a young guy. I think he's only 25 or 26. The 5 highest graded Broncos from Sunday Night Football, higher than Surtain and Fuller is Dalton Risner at 77.7 according to PFF. Had a monster game. You could see him pulling on counterplay. You got him out in space on screen passes to Shavontae, opening up that. I mean, it just all over the place. And it wasn't the game that the Broncos had hoped for. But I think there's a lot of positive takeaways from that game. The Chiefs' defense stepped up and was able to shut down the Broncos from scoring too much. But, the way they were able to move the ball was in large part due to Risner's ability to block. So, shout out to Risner. And then on the defensive side of the ball, we got a young guy, a third rounder in the 2020 draft, to the Texans, talking about Jonathan Grenard. This is a guy who's 6'3", 263, so he's, borderline a Hogmolly. We're going to let it count for this episode because he had a ham sandwich for lunch today, and he tipped the scales at 265. So
Nice.
Age 24, a guy that is a prototypical edge rusher in the NFL, a guy that's not really getting the love that he deserves this year. And so he's through 9 games played. He's got 8 sacks. He's got 2 forced fumbles, and he's been one of the lone bright spots on that Texans defense. It's been a rough year in Houston. The Texans being what they've been, the Astros had to lose the World Series to my Braves. I mean, it is what it is. The Rockets don't have James Harden anymore. It's been a rough year in Houston, but I think that this is one of the few building blocks that they've kind of been able to discover because it is an all-hands-on-deck situation where a lot of young guys get a lot of fresh playing time and get to prove themselves.
Yeah, I like Reisner. I like Grenard. I like both those guys. And yeah, maybe the Texans will build around Grenard, but
they did release Zach Cunningham.
They did release Zach Cunningham. They released Whitney Merciless. They seem to have a plan. We'll see. So maybe he ends up on a different team. We all know what to expect from the Houston Texans. It's kind of a mess there. Let's see. Let's move on. Big games. I'll run through them. You can hop in, tell me which ones you're looking forward to, and I'll rebuttal with mine. A lot of big games this week. Las Vegas at Kansas City. The Raiders going against the Kansas City Chiefs at home. The Raiders have beaten the Chiefs before, so it is a interesting game there. Big for the Chiefs to try to get closer to that first seed. Pretty big game there. Baltimore at Cleveland, another big game there. Baltimore needs to rebound after their loss to Pittsburgh. But if Cleveland can beat Baltimore, maybe they can turn things around and get back to the race that people thought they were going to be in from the beginning of the year, me included, myself included, rather. This is probably my favorite one. Buffalo at Tampa Bay. I think this one could be huge for both of these teams. I think Buffalo needs to rebound off their loss to New England. If they can come and beat Tampa Bay, that's big for them. That kind of hurts Tampa Bay in some of their seeding for the playoffs. They will still make it. But they don't need a loss. Neither of these teams need a loss right now.
It'll be a huge confidence booster for the Bills. You don't want to lose back-to-back games like that and all of a sudden have the wind kind of knocked out of you, and then all of a sudden you're scrambling just to make the wild card.
Yeah, what a turnaround that would be. That'd be miserable. Los Angeles Rams at Arizona. That's another big one, too. Could really dictate how this division goes. It's really come down to these two teams, and if the Rams can pull away, they can try to take away from Arizona. Selfishly, as a Packers fan, I kind of want Arizona to lose this game to give the Packers a better chance going forward, because it looks like Arizona is in the closer to the driver's seat than some of the other teams in the NFC.
I think that the Rams need this because they need Stafford to get back on track. Last couple of weeks, Matt Stafford's been banged up, dealing with some different injuries, a shoulder, an ankle. I mean, that game in Green Bay really took a toll on him, and I think that the Rams need him to bounce back. They need him to look like his old self and to play to the ability that he can play. Again, talking about confidence booster, Monday night prime time, 8:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Rams and Cardinals. You win that game. If you're the Rams, you're sitting pretty. You'd have, I think, 9 wins at that point, and you might not win the division, but you would at least be set up better than you had the week prior in the playoff picture.
Yep. And I should say, these past two this past Monday Night Football game and this Monday Night Football game, pretty good Monday Night Football games. And they should be. Hopefully this one turns out to be good as the last one. And let's see. Do you want to talk about the playoff situations now or hold it off till next week?
We can hold it off till next week. Like we said, there's several games that are, going to shake it up this week, and so I think that would be something to kind of leave for the listeners next week. I will say that there's one more game that I think we should probably highlight. That's Washington versus Dallas. So Dallas has to go at Washington. I'm not suggesting that Washington's going to make a run on the division, but, Washington has won 4 straight.
But I'm suggesting that Washington's going to make a run on the...
I'm saying Rivera has a way of galvanizing his team and letting them rally around each other. And, I've seen him do this in Carolina before in seasons where we had no business making the playoffs, and he just kind of gets them believing in themselves, and they get on a roll, and then they are a buzzsaw. They are hard to stop. So it starts with the defense. Even with Chase Young out, defense is setting the tone. And, Cowboys at 8-4, Washington at 6-6. If Washington wins that game, Washington's a game behind. And Washington's last games at Philly, at Dallas, home against Philly, at New York Giants. Pretty winnable there. Dallas's last games would be at the Giants, home against Washington, home against the Cardinals, which, hard to stop Kyler in that offense, and then at Philly to end the season. So if Washington were to win this week, it could get interesting.
Puts pressure on
I'm not
them.
saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying if they do win, it does make things very interesting.
Yep. And the way the schedules have been set up, a lot of these teams have division games towards the end because that's always exciting. You always like to see these division games towards the end because those are the ones that, no matter how good the teams are, they can go either way. All right, so we will wrap it up with that. We'll talk about the playoffs next week. We'll talk about some other things we have planned there. Thank you for listening. If you stuck around, if you just tuned in, or if you're just now looking at me, like and subscribe. Keep up with what we talked about. We got one coming every week, except for every now and then holidays. Sometimes we just can't do those. Just tough around those holiday seasons. But we will definitely be around for the bowl season. So make sure you tune in. Like, subscribe. Much love. Leave a comment. We'll be back next week. Same time or different time. We'll be back sometime. Have a good day. Hogmolly's out. Let me find the stop button.